Hi, my name is Sheila and this is my channel, Seaside Snuggles, Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts, where I focus mainly on quilts, but will craft anything that brings me joy. What's bringing me joy today is finishing the rainbow quilt. So, this is the last in a 5-part series on how to make this quilt. In the first 4 videos, we went over the 4 different types of blocks that make up this quilt, which of course you can use in any quilt. I will link that somewhere around here. I have it turned upside down from what you'll see in the video because I wanted you to be able to see the gradient here. And I had a lot of fun with this quilt. And so before we get started, I just wanted to thank all of you for the watches, the likes, the subscriptions, the comments, the helpful hints and advice. I really appreciate it. I love that you're here. I hope you'll stay. And it's just been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for those of you who joined me in what turned out to be sort of a quilt along. If you're interested in watching the first 4 videos before you watch this one, I will put a card up here. If you're interested in purchasing the pattern, there'll be a link down below in the description along with links to all the videos in this series, or you could scan here and that'll take you right to the pattern. So let's get started on finishing the rainbow quilt. These are Lily and Loom. I made my original rainbow quilt pattern with these Lily and Loom fabrics and I wanted to do it again, but the difference is I'm using the same gray palette that I used in the gray parts of the quilt, but instead of rainbow this time, what I was able to find was red sky, which looks really pretty. And I just wanted to open these with you so you could see what fabrics we were working with and then do a little bit of a sort. So I'm going to open this up with you. And you can see from the side how pretty that is. It kind of looks like a sunset. And I have an idea for the way I want to put these blocks together, but I kind of need to inventory what we have here so that I try to save the ribbon and then use the ribbon when I bundle the quilt at the end. So that's why I didn't just cut it. Let's look at this. Well, actually, do you want to look at the grays first? We'll take a quick look at the grays because those aren't the show. The show is going to be this red sky. So the quilt that I have in the shop, the pattern, calls for 36 fat quarters. 36, sorry, 10-inch pieces. These bundles have 42, if my research was correct. And so I may change the dimensions of this quilt to use all of the fat quarters, all of the 10-inch squares. If there are 42, then I can do a 6 by 7 square quilt. Right now I have it as a 5 by 7 square quilt, but I might do it rectangular. Why am I saying square? I could do a 6 by 7 instead of a 5 by 7. And I think I did the 5 by 7 because I wanted the symmetry to be centered, but I may just make all blocks. We'll see. Anyhow, these are what our grays look like. See if I can get these to show. And there are these letter fabrics, these, I call them snowflake fabrics, these squiggly dots, these leaves, hash marks, bricks, cute little hedgehogs. So I really loved this line and I would have bought a lot more if I had some foresight. But I just thought, they'd come back and sell the fabric. So they didn't. All right, so those are my grays. And here are the red sky colors. So we have some teals, some oranges. It's going to be so pretty. So there's so many ways now. I have grays in the middle of this. So I'm going to need, so when I make this quilt, it's going to be paired one of these blocks with one of these blocks. And if I do one for one, I'm going to have a lot that are gray and gray, but I think I'm going to stick with that. I think that's going to give it a really cool look. And as it stands, I will probably leave these fabrics in the order that they're in. Maybe. Or I might move the gray to the outside. I got to think about it. But beautiful golds, oranges. Like, I love the transition. I love the designs. And I love that I could get gray and a color design. Now, these are more rare than they used to be. I got the last ones from the seller on eBay. And there are some more out there, but people are really charging some exorbitant prices. So see if you can get a deal. They offered me a great price, and I'm very happy with it. I also got the... They had a couple of 2.5 inch jelly roll bundles, so I picked those up as well. And these are the rainbow ones like I used in the quilt. And black and white. I don't know what I'm going to do with these yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start pairing these. And as I pair them, I want to not have duplicates. So I just took a gray that's dark, and I'm doing it with this gray that's with this red. Well, I don't want to use that gray again. So I'm going to go down to the end of my grays, and I'm going to pair these. Am I going to pair these? I don't think I want to pair the same pattern either. So my grays are going to be more scattered. I'm going to keep the colors in order though. There's quite a few of the same prints. So I'm going to pair these like this. And I don't want all of my... Here's what I'm going to do. This is going to sound crazy. Every time I use one of these, I'm going to move it to the bottom. That type of gray. And that way, I won't get a bunch of these that are mixed up. So now I've used this. And hopefully I'll get a good distribution that way. So now I'm going to put all of these at the bottom. I also need to put these at the bottom because I already used one of these. Then I'm going to pair this. And I'm going to put these at the bottom. So I want to avoid having the same color red with the same gray, and I also want to avoid having the same patterns together because I want it to be mixy. Pair this. And by doing it this way, hopefully I will get some of these patterns with the different colors as we transverse through these patterns. And I think I'm just going to work on the red. So you can see how my little system is going. And you know that I like to, break up my work. I just did those. I just did my brick, so I'm going to take my brick pattern to the bottom. I'm going to get these cute little hedgehogs. I'll go through the gray stack once. That's what I'll do. So now my hedgehogs go to the bottom. And I don't want my hash marks together. And these are the last things I have. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of these and match it with this. And I'll take one of these and match it with this. And that way I have gotten through all of my fabrics, and I'm going to move these two, because I just used both of these, to the bottom. So that when I come back to this stack, I know that I'm starting with this and matching this. So I'm going to set those aside for a moment. And now what are we going to do with these pairs? What we're going to do with these pairs is we're going to sew all the way around the outside on every one of them, all the way around. If you've watched any of the other videos in this series, you know how all of the blocks start. So I'm just going to go through this really fast. After sewing our pairs all the way around the outside, we're going to cut them diagonally each way to form 4 half square triangles. And here the arrows are pointing to the places that I use to align my ruler when I'm cutting my pieces. The main thing is you want to get a 90-degree angle in the center of what was your pair of blocks, and that'll help you get nice half square triangles. Here I'm going to press half the half square triangles towards the color and half away from the color, and that was so that I could stagger the seam allowances for nesting. Here is where I'm pairing all of the rest of the 10-inch blocks in my 2 stacks, and I'm trying to keep it mixed up so that I don't have identical pairs. So if I have like a hedgehog fabric with a hedgehog fabric with the lettering gray, then I don't want to have a hedgehog fabric with that same lettering gray again. And so that's why I use this method of going through the gray stack and pulling one off at a time to match with the color stack, which I left in order. Now here I have my grays and grays. So all I wanted to do is make sure I had decent contrast and that the patterns did not match between the grays. But I just wanted to show you that I did need to take some time and sort all the fabrics and pair everything up. And this is at 8 times speed, so it took a little while. Now, after I get them all paired up, I take them to the machine and sew them. So this is after they're sewn. And now I'm sorting them into stacks with one iteration of the color in each stack. So the ones that I'm setting off to the side, I had 3 of that particular print, so I'm just setting them off to the side. I am going to use them, but I figured that my brain would kind of work out my gradient better if I didn't have duplicates of the colors. So I'm just going to work with one half at a time, lay some things out, see how I like it, and then fill it in with the second half and with those pieces that I had triples of. So this is the process of me bulk cutting pairs into half square triangles. I find that if I group tasks together, I'm a little more efficient because I'm not having to change what I'm thinking about. But then when I get bored, I do change to something else. So I may not cut them all at the same time, but I'll cut a lot of them at the same time. Then I'll sew a lot of them at the same time. Then I'll go back. So I was asked what was the difference between the positive and the negative blocks. These are the blocks we created. The positive blocks have the motif in color and the outside in gray. The negative blocks have the motif in gray and the outside in color. That's important here where we want to stagger the positive and negative blocks like a checkerboard. So on the left hand side, it's kind of hard to see with that light blue. But with all the other colors, you can see going from the second block on the top row, I'm starting with a negative block that has the color on the outside, and then going to a positive block with the color as the motif. The sun blocks are a little bit more difficult, but just look at the outside of the block. That is a negative block. The motif is in gray. Then the last block on the top row is a star. It's got the gray around the outside. It's a positive block. So I'm just going negative, positive, negative, positive. And then on the next row, I'm leaving off that first section. So ignore that for a moment because it's hard to see. On the next row, I'm doing the opposite and I'm alternating just like a checkerboard pattern. In this case, I was laying it out like the pattern has it with 5 across the top and 7 down. That left 7 blocks out of the stack that I made. And then I decided to go ahead and go 6 across and 7 down so that I could use all the blocks that I was making. And that ends up looking like this. So I have also changed the way that the colors are arranged, not just the number of blocks. I decided to go from the bottom right with the red and then do the gradient kind of up diagonally to the left. To achieve this, I had to change some of the remaining blocks that were the 7 additional blocks to kind of make the gradient a little smoother. And I'll point out some of the blocks that I changed, which is the bottom left star, the row above it, the second star. Let's see, if you go from the top right to the second row, second from the right is one that I changed. And the way I changed those is I wanted to scatter out the little bit of yellow fabric that I had left. And so I put 1 or 2 yellow pieces to smooth out that gradient in those blocks. And I auditioned half square triangles before I made these blocks to see how I wanted them to look. This is auditioning a negative block, and this is auditioning a positive block. And I also did a similar thing with the light blue to green and gray. So here's a star that I used 1 green and 1 blue and 2 gray. This star I used 2 blue, 1 green, and 1 gray. And in the last star I used 2 blue that are for a negative block and a green that's for a negative block. Now they're mostly stars because I ended up making 2 gray stars and decided to take one apart and distribute the color amongst that star because I didn't want to have 2 gray stars, and instead I made a gray sunblock here. Okay, so I have the bottom 2 rows taken off of the design wall so that I can sew them together, but I have each block laid out very specifically, not just in its location, but its orientation, so that I can get that color wash effect. So it's very important that I sew these rows together in a way that will maintain both the location and orientation of each block. So here's something else I've learned from Donna Jordan. I just pick up the blocks on each row from left to right, and then I keep them in a stack. I put a pin in the top right corner so I know that's the orientation. I've picked up 2 rows worth of blocks so that I could keep my cycle going as I sew through. I try not to pick up too much more than that because I get a little confused, but even with the confusion, or to alleviate some of that confusion, I have little fabric numbers that I can pin onto my rows so I know which one is the top one and which one is the bottom one. And for this one, I like to put the number on the last block so that I can just keep going through. So, with that said, this is my very bottom row, and then this is the second to the bottom row. And I'm going to lay them side by side like this. And I'm going to take my first block and I'll leave it face up. I'm going to take my second block, I'm going to put it to the right and put it on top. And now I know this is the way this needs to be sewn. And then I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to put it back in the top right corner. Take my pin out of this one and I'm going to do the same thing. I know this is my left one. This is going to be the next one. So I'm going to put this on top. And I know this needs to be sewn this way. And I'm going to put it underneath my first pair. And I'm going to put this pin back in. And now I'm going to go sew those two pair. Let's move this off to the side. And actually, let me put a pin in there because I don't want to get this turned around either. So I'm going to match up my sides. What will nest will nest. What won't nest. And these blocks are very stretchy. So my blocks that aren't quite 11.5 inches, I'm just going to use the ease to make them 11.5 inches. So I didn't have anything meet there on those, though I will with most of the blocks. I'm going to nest this seam right here because it wants to nest. If it didn't want to nest, I'd still want to align the center. Okay, I don't have anything else that matches here, so I'm just going to line up my sides. I'm going to check the outside of the blocks and make sure that those line up, and that will help to keep me squared away. I got this weird thing happening with my thread still. Line up the bottom, and let's go. All right, so now I can sew the next one. I'm going to take this pin out of here. Match up my top corners. See if I have something that will match here. I don't, because it's a star. The stars aren't going to match up with everything else. This, I'm going to nest the center. And then I'm going to match up my bottoms. So far both of these have had a star in the pair, so they don't match up. But when it's not a star in the pair, it will match up. All right, so now I have 2 blocks on the machine. I'm going to take the first one off, which is for my first stack. And my seam is on the right hand side of that pair, so I know that when I open this up, as long as I haven't rotated it, that the next block is going to go right here. So I'm going to take the block off of here. I'm going to put my pin back in. I'm going to take the next block and I'm going to line it up right here. And we're going to go sew it on the machine. So I'm lining up this top corner. Remember, my blocks didn't turn out perfectly sized, so I'm making adjustments right here. So here's the middle. They don't match, but I do want to get them lined up. And I can just flip this right here and snip it later. That's fine. And then I'm going to line this up here. Now, if I wanted to bring more rows over, I would just use more labels or use a heat erasable pen on my blocks or some way to just stay organized, but you can definitely bring more over if you like. So now we're going to go off of this stack, put my pin right back in there. This is going to go on the right. My middle is going to nest on this one, but nothing else is going to match because I'm using a star, so I'm not going to worry. Get that middle lined up because it's going to match. And give it a little bit of a tug since my seam allowance is pointing towards me. I'm going to slip my finger in between the two layers and just give a little bit of pressure on that bottom layer to snug up those seams. This I don't want to flip. All right, so this is the first row again. And we're going to take this off and open it up. Take the next block off of the first stack, put our pin back in the top right so we keep our orientation correct, and then we can put the next block on. But here's a little hint for you. If you're using rows that are together, you can see how it's color on the outside and then gray on the outside for the next block. If you have color on the outside and then you have color on the outside of the next block, that's your hint that you're pulling from the wrong stack. So that's another clue that you can use to keep yourself straight as you're sewing these together. Also, keep a photograph of your design wall nearby in case you get confused, like I did a little bit with these rows. Fortunately, I had a photograph to tell me that I had my rows upside down. So yeah, this is one of my wonky blocks. I can see it's a little short in the corner, so I'm just going to compensate. But these are very stretchy because they're all biased. So you can make these blocks fit in a way that if you use half square triangles that are not cut on the bias, you might have a little bit more difficulty at this point getting things lined up. So see how that is? I'm going to split the difference because that's very close to 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to split the difference. And hope it works out. Let's give it a peek. That is very close. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that last piece off. This is for the second row. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to sew it one more time because this is so close to the edge. I really get to see how wobbly my stitch lines are when I go back and stitch over it. So now we're to the second row. So we're going to be pulling from the second stack. I'm going to pull my pin out, put it right back in to keep my orientation. I've got a negative block being connected to a positive block. I'm just going to align the right hand side. The centers will nest, but nothing else on that side will because we're using another star block. So I'm making lots of corrections because my blocks weren't perfectly sized. But it is going to work out. All right, so here's my center. I'm going to push this seam allowance up so I can nest it. Okay, back to the first row. I made this really narrow again. I might want to re-sew that. But okay, let's go to the first. We're on the first row, so we're going to pull from the first stack. We've got one more block left, so I'm just going to put that pin back in there. I'm going to flip this on top and get it ready to sew, but let me put a pin in here. But I'm going to go back and re-sew that other column, that other row first. Hold it where it is. Let's flip this over. I'm going to re-sew this piece. Here we go. Now we can bring this over. And I've got my centers lined up, so now I just want to get my edges lined up as best I can. I really don't have my centers lined up because these are way off. I'm just going to line up the top and then we'll work out that center. Alright, now we'll match up these parts. All right, let's get this iron going so it'll be ready when I'm finished with my sewing. So we got, oh, that is terrible. Can you see that? I don't know what I did there. We're going to have to sew this one again as well. So I'll put number 2 over here, flip this over, and we're going to sew this seam again. Wow, just a terrible job, Sheila. Make sure this is flat under here. But corrected. This is row number 2, so we're sewing the second to the last one on. Again, we're adding a positive block to the end where we had a negative block, so that checks out. And let's get that going. My center. Sure that this doesn't get flipped up. And let's see, let's make the bottoms meet. I bet the super accurate quilters are losing their minds watching me sew right now. So here's the last piece of the second from the bottom row. At this point, I figured out that I just swapped the rows, but it's fine because they're still going to be in order. And I'm looking at that other row and I'm seeing that my seam is really wobbly again, so I'm just going to go fix it. It's a very narrow seam allowance because of the way my blocks are cut. Remember, I cut them to, I decided in the middle that I was going to cut them to 11 1/4, and then I changed my mind. So 11 1/2 is what I kept the goal at, but they're not all 11 1/2, so I'm making adjustments in the seam allowance for that. All right. stretchy blocks. How's that look? Not too bad. So I guess it's okay. So this is the second row, and we'll be sewing on the very last block for this row as well. It's a negative block that's being sewn onto a positive block. And I just flipped it over because it's a block that's a little bit small, so I want to be able to monitor that I'm catching enough of the fabric. So just make sure I get it straight across the top, line up that corner. And now I know I've got about 1/8 of an inch to accommodate, and I've got a seam to nest here. Okay, now I'm going to line up the bottom corner like so. So this has a thing that can nest, so I'm going to go ahead and flip that as well. Okay, so that's the last block sewn onto each of the 2 rows, and we're going to separate them. This is my number 1 block, but as you see in the graphic, it's actually the bottom block or the bottom row of the quilt, and I'm just going to press seams all towards the colored fabric. So each of the colored blocks will have the seams pressed towards its center, and this will help you to nest the rows as you sew them to one another. Where those triangles come together, it may be a little bit difficult to get it to, bend towards that. So just use your hand and give it a little coaxing. If you have any seam allowances that are flipped, go ahead and give them a clip. And I found that it's easier to kind of get it started from the back side and then press it from the front side after I get all the seam allowances kind of going the way that I want them to go. So I just work my way down each row, and believe it or not, this is 8 times speed, so this is not a fast process for me, but I'm checking all of my seam allowances to make sure that they're going in the directions that I want them to go. Most importantly, the seam allowances that are between blocks. They should all be going towards the negative blocks or the blocks that have color around the outside. And I was pretty lucky. Well, I don't know if it's lucky, but even in making the adjustments for blocks that weren't quite 11.5 inches, I was able to maintain most of my points. So use that ease to your advantage and double stitch where you need to. I like to also trim my threads as I go along. So let's grab the second row that we were working on, which is actually the second row from the top, and from the bottom. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to press all the seam allowances toward the blocks with the color around the outside, which is what I've been calling the negative blocks. Same thing as before. And you can kind of see the secondary pattern between blocks that don't have a star. The star blocks kind of break up the pattern, but if you were to make a quilt with just the sun block, the gem block, and the spinner block, you would see the secondary pattern that's kind of a cross in between. blocks. Once we get both rows ironed toward the negative blocks, then we'll be ready to sew them to one another. So I'm bringing in the other row. This is your last chance to make sure that you haven't rotated the row and that you have the correct row above the other row. And then I just kind of fiddle-faddle with it until I can get it lined up so that I can confirm that that's the correct row that should be where it's placed. And then I flip the top row on top of the bottom row and start pinning between the blocks. If you have pressed your seam allowances towards the negative blocks on both rows, then they will nest between blocks. Some of these seam allowances will be towards you when you sew this together, some will be away from you. I just pin them all. And I'm making my way from left to right. Then when I get to the end, I'm pinning those corners so they're lined up. And then I'm going to work my way backwards and pin together the center seam on each block. Some of them are going to be nesting and some are going to be in the same direction. And for those, I just flip them over. I will clip them at this point instead of waiting until it's sewn so that it flips over more easily. And I just make my way back to the beginning. And then I pin what would be the beginning corner. And then I take it to the machine and we can get this sewn. And because I'm sewing the rows together, I do want to go ahead and back tack it. So let's see. Back tack. Now today is a day that I've had to sew some of these over again. I'm going to take the weight. I'm not going to just let this drag on the floor. I want to put as much of the weight as I can on the table so that it doesn't skew me. I'm going to try to keep my seam allowances in the direction that I put them in initially. So I can feel that thick seam allowance under there. Alright. Give myself a little more slack. So even though I have the quilt on the table over here to keep gravity from pulling at it, I want to try to keep it lined up here with my sewing machine. So you got to give yourself some slack. Some of these intersections are pretty thick. Okay. So I'm adjusting for all of these undersized blocks. Thick. Slack. Now, of course, eventually I'll get to the point where I shouldn't talk while I'm sewing. Eventually, I'll get to the point where I can't keep the weight on the table anymore, but by then, it will be light enough that it's not tugging at me. All right, so here's one where it nests in another spot. It depends on the blocks that are coming together. So I must have two stars right next to each other. I try to take my pins out as I sew, but I don't always take my pins out. I want to get as close as I can, and usually that means getting the needle into the seam allowance like that, and then you can take your pin out. But sometimes I get too close. And I end up going over the pin. But if you're going slow enough, your needle should deflect off of the pin and not be a dangerous situation. So whether you plan on sewing over the pins or not, slow down. Hold on. I want to keep my iron hot because we're just about to iron. Okay, keeping my seam allowance. Once my needle is in that bottom seam allowance, if it's pressed in that direction, then I can take the pin out. If I take it out before then I might have defeated the purpose of putting the pin in the first place. All right, last set. And this one, I think maybe it's just cut strangely, but we're going to use that ease. And then we're going to back tack here at the end. And that's how you sew your pairs together. So here I am pinning my pairs of pairs together. So we're putting 4 rows together now after sewing them in pairs. And I'm pinning them exactly the same way between the blocks and then the halfway marks on the blocks. Remember to back tack at the beginning and end of your rows. And this actually comes together pretty quickly once you get your row sewn together. So that's why I'm just fast forwarding here. It's basically repeating the same steps that you took to sew the pairs together. I just press in one direction. I just choose a direction. They're not all the same. Just whatever I feel like at the moment, which is usually just away from me. But you may have to, give those triangles some extra attention if they don't want to bend over. And here, I didn't like where the seam allowance, it didn't come together with a nice joint the way I like. So I decided to just pick that one section and give myself lots of space before and after the specific intersection so that I could distribute the stretch along a bigger section, getting those ends together. And it worked out just fine, you see. It's a very nice, tight intersection. I did have some strings in there, so I'm getting those clipped. Once I have 4 sewn together, I took a little break and I used natural light for recording, and the light was really dark by the time I got back to it, and my adjustment is not great. That's why this looks so pale, but it's just the lighting issue for this section. But again, I'm pinning between each of the blocks, then pinning the halfway point, and then taking it to the sewing machine, back tacking at the beginning of my stitch line, making sure all my seams get nested properly as I go along, taking out my pins. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Just kind of rinse and repeat. So let's go to the design wall and review what we've made. This is the end of our rainbow quilt that I have now sewn with another packet of the same fabrics, but with a different color scheme. And let's take a little tour. So We've got the gradient running from, or the color wash, however you want to say it, from reds to oranges. We've got some yellows, teals up to the blue, which I distributed with the gray. And I really like the way it turned out. I did do one extra column on here from the pattern to use up all of the fabric in my 2 layer cakes. And when I came back in, I showed you how I had it with the 5 columns and 7 rows before. And when I went back in to use the remainder of those blocks, I had to make 7 more blocks. And I just went in to try to make the color wash a little more subtle with what was left. And I only had a couple of the yellow pieces. I took apart one of my black and white stars because I didn't want them both to be stars. Here's my black and white block here, and my grayscale block here, and a fully grayscale block up there. All the other blocks have at least 1 block of color fabric. So I redistributed that. And some of these blocks, like this one here, I just wanted to kind of smooth out the color wash. So I used 2 of the yellow here. I used a yellow down there to kind of, bring that around. Up here, I've got 1 yellow in a teal block. I've got 1 teal in a blue block to, get that wash. Here I've got 1 teal in a blue block. And I think it turned out well. I didn't want my 2 grayscale blocks to be right next to each other, though they did end up in the same row. But that's why I didn't sew the blocks together until I had my whole layout done. I recommend you do the same. Also, in terms of your scenes nesting at this point, if you're rotating blocks around, because I've rotated a lot to try to get the colors where I want them and to try to keep from having the same fabric right next to each other like this, it was unavoidable in some cases because of everything else that's around it. But I think it turned out really nice. And I hope that if you have any questions on how I laid it out, feel free to ask down in the comments below or shoot me a message in the community tab. And I will be sure to get back to it. I know I'm late on responding to some comments right now, but I was working on this and I just try to stay away from the laptop when I'm doing that because I do not stay focused very well. But I'm very happy with it. I'm still debating top and bottom, whether or not I want to use those jelly roll strips to extend the length, but I think it's a good size for 2 people to cuddle up under. What do you think? So I'll probably leave it like this. Anyway, I just want to say how much I appreciate all the subscribers, the new and the old. I appreciate the comments. It means so much to me that you would take the time to watch my videos, maybe learn a little something, and let me show you what I've made. One day we'll have a little chat and I'll really explain what this means to me. But for right now, thank you so much. I hope that you'll continue to like my videos. I hope I'll gain some new subscribers. I really appreciate my old subscribers. I love you so much. Thank you so much. I have opened up sharing in the community. So if you try any of these blocks or any of these quilts, please share them. I would love to see them. It makes my day. Like, I know it sounds exaggerated, but it makes my day when people make stuff that I was able to help teach them to make. And am I going to get teary-eyed over quilting? Okay, let's just end it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See you soon.